those people in there. We were screaming. Everybody that was in there, we were screaming, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. We made it up, but all those people in there, we was, oh God, we was crying. All those people in there. You know, it shook us up so bad. It shook us up.
What about your friends and the people that you know that work in the building? Were they all able to get out, Amy?
Well, the people in my department, I think everyone made it out safe, but I don't know about the rest of them. I mean, you know, I'm worried about them because I don't know if they made it out safe or oh God, or if they died or what. I don't even know.
Where are you now, Amy?
I'm home, but it's like I'm in my bed because my whole body is just shaking. My whole body is shaking. It's like I can't even move. It's just shaking.
Well, Amy, we're awfully glad that you're okay, and we thank you for sharing this terrifying story with us today. And we hope that your friends are going to all be okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Okay. That's a very vivid account of what so many people went through, and as she indicated, there were so many people left in the building when it came down. Bob Bazell telling us the chilling story of a nurse online with her husband who was still in the building, and then the building came down. There were people in wheelchairs. CNBC's Ron Insana was down in the area when the building came down itself, and even those who were in the immediate surrounding area were in great peril, Ron.
Absolutely, Tom. The billowing smoke that rushed through the streets of Manhattan really enveloped several of us who were trying to get around the World Trade Center and go down to the west side to hook up with NBC and CNBC crews. And it was so enveloping that the air around us turned jet black. You could not see. As I told you earlier in the day, I had the good fortune to find an unlocked car which I was hiding behind, really, to get away from the blowing winds. And as it got darker and darker, I crawled in and stayed there for several minutes until you could see some light again, and then managed to get inside a building as well and connected with a couple of police officers and some others. That video that you look at right now, in some ways does phenomenal justice to what it looked like, but as it's chasing you down the street, there's really no way to describe the feeling that you have trying to get away from the falling debris and the smoke and all the other materials that were flying through the air.
Were you able to breathe during that 2-minute period when it was just pitch black and the air was thick with smoke?
Luckily, the car that I was leaning against and kind of hiding behind was open, and I jumped in as soon as I could. It was very difficult breathing, and it was getting reasonably hot inside the car for lack of air. I don't believe that it was life-threatening, but it sure felt that way. I mean, there was no way to know what was going to happen next. We couldn't tell the trajectory of the building as it began to implode. We didn't know if it would fall on the surrounding buildings or just simply come straight down as it ultimately did. And you didn't know what was next. It was dark. It was impossible to see, hear. There's really no communication with anybody else for 3 or 4 minutes. And
right.
Inside the building, it was certainly calmer, but again, people were panicked there as well.
All right, thank you very much. CNBC's Ron Insana. In the Middle East today, the Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres was scheduled to meet with Yasser Arafat. Obviously, that meeting was called off. Yasser Arafat has condemned this attack in the United States in the strongest possible terms, and Foreign Minister Shimon Peres joins us now from the NBC Bureau in Tel Aviv. Has your government been in touch with President Bush, Mr. Peres?
No, we were in touch with the American ambassador. We have offered to send our rescue group, which is very trained on it. As a matter of fact, they're already on their way. You know, all of us feel today like being an American. Your pain is our pain, and we can imagine what's going over in the country. But it is the United States, again, that can again save the humanity. One of the greatest dangers to civilization, to our future. It's an attempt to bring us in a jungle where people will not be able to walk or to fly or to feel free. And I think there are ways and means to handle this challenge. And there is nobody better equipped, in spite of all the agonies, than the United States to lead again the world to become a more civilized and safer place.
Mr. Peres, there are going to be so many people who are worried that this act of war, and it is nothing less than this, on the United States, will only have a polarizing effect, that it will not be in any way a means to get countries together and right-thinking people in all of the world, including in your very volatile part of the world, to come to some common agreement against terrorism?
I don't think so. I think that the ones among the Arabs who are engaged in terror will today understand that this is the end of the story. They cannot go ahead with it. And I think the world has to get itself organized with the leadership of the United States to identify countries or organizations which are hosting or supporting or financing this terrible form of terror. I think also leaders, religious leaders, spiritual leaders, newspapermen, political figures have to condemn with the full heart the appearance of suicidal murders, which really cause the same damage like in Pearl Harbor. They shouldn't be permitted. It's against the gospel. It's against everything we stand for. And I see it as a world struggle that concerns each of us individually, and I believe we can manage and handle it, no matter if you're an Arab or a Jew or an American.
And what about the conduct of the Israeli government in its continuing conflict with the PLO and with Yasser Arafat? Is that going to be changed as a result of all of this?
That's my hope. We are telling today the Arabs and the Palestinians, look, today it's the chance to depart from terror completely and fully and go back to the district of negotiations, of understanding. Nothing will be solved by weapons and killings, and everything that was solved in the past and may be solved in the future is around the negotiating table.
Have you had any contact with Chairman Arafat today or with his representatives?
What I'm telling you, we let them know as well.
Has there been any rescheduling of the meeting that you were supposed to have today with the chairman?
Not yet, but first of all, let us see what will happen. I hope the Palestinians will use this terrible occasion in order to free from themselves from the mistake of being engaged in acts of terror and destruction.
Shimon Peres, the foreign minister of Israel, a man who's been prominent in that country's leadership, regardless of the government, for so many years. Thank you very much for being with us here today.
Thank you.
Foreign Minister of Israel, who was scheduled to meet today with Yasser Arafat. To bring you back up to date on a couple of matters, President Bush en route from Omaha, Nebraska, Offutt Air Force Base, which is south of Omaha, the Strategic Air Command headquarters, after a National Security Council meeting via teleconferencing. He's now en route back to Washington, D.C. The president was in Florida this morning for an education and literacy event when Andy Card whispered in his ear that there had been a second attack on the World Trade Center. He issued a strong statement, then left there, flew to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, from there to Offutt. Let's listen for just a moment to what the president had to say today.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with...
That's President George W. Bush, who was speaking at that time from Louisiana. Then he went on to Omaha, and he's now on his way back to Washington, D.C. His counselor, Karen Hughes, speaking from the FBI, said that all of the federal agencies had their ongoing operations plans in effect, and the government was performing as best could be expected under the circumstances. Banks did stay open today, even though the financial markets were shut down here in New York City. The minister of the
from our leaders, and we're all very
quoted as saying hundreds of people coming in have been burned from head to toe. Bellevue Hospital reporting more than 100 patients brought in, 2 dead. Beth Israel reporting earlier that 70 patients had been brought in. There are some estimates from hospitals in Virginia near the Pentagon of dozens of people having been brought in there. And I guess the heartening note in all this, hospitals around New York that are not in the immediate vicinity of the World Trade Centers, people saying hundreds of donors are reportedly lined up to give blood outside Beth Israel Medical Center and some others here in New York City. And what I guess is a precursor of what is going to be the kinds of terrible news that we're going to get over the next few days, a spokesman at the medical examiner's office in New York City, the coroner's office, says that for now all of the bodies that are being brought in, dead bodies, will go to the medical examiner's office on First Avenue here in New York. They say they have room for several hundred bodies, and they are making room for more space since they anticipate more bodies will be brought in. One other note to mention, at 4:30 this afternoon Eastern Time, the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, says that it has activated all 10 of FEMA's regional headquarters around the country.
Child psychology at UT Southwestern, Dr. Pete Stefanoa, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
What do you tell your children? Because
I think we have to turn to all the religious leaders to denounce suicidal terrorists. Look the damage they brought. And then our heart is with the United States. Each of us feels today like being an American. Our heart are with the families, with the wounded people. But in spite of it, may I say, America paid a very high price, but America remained the only country that can save the world from this terrible jungle-like introduction.
Sir, it was reported. Sir, it was reported earlier today that the Israeli government believed that this was the work of Osama bin Laden. Is that true?
No, we don't have definite information, and we are not going to blame or to guess.
The Palestinian representative for the PLO here in the United States has said that there is absolutely no clue, there's no indication that any Palestinians were involved in this attack. Do you agree with him? Do you believe him?
I think it's a day for the Palestinians to take the opportunity and divorce terror from their own midst. It will help them. Let them go back. Let us come back to the table of negotiations. With terror, nothing will be achieved because it doesn't matter who is just responsible for this case. Everybody who is engaged in terror.
Yorkers calmly, if that's the right word, calmly left the scene, moved out of the area. No reports of trouble at all as firefighters and police personnel came down into the city. Scores, hundreds of civilians started to move out. And they are still calmly moving out. We suspect there is some sense of shock as they try and figure out what has happened to their city, what has happened to their lives, and perhaps most importantly, what has happened to their friends and their co-workers who may not have gotten out of those buildings today. One of the problems that the city is faced with is, and as Richard alluded to, is moving people around. You have essentially a shutdown going on here. In some of the outlying areas, city governments are trying to support the city as best they can. Tom Swayze is the mayor of Glen Cove out on Long Island. Tom, I think you're on the phone. Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, this is Tom Swayze, mayor of the city of Glen Cove.
Tom, tell us what Glen Cove is doing to support the efforts going on here in Manhattan.
We have high-speed ferries that operate from Glen Cove to Pier 11 down by Wall Street. And we've already evacuated about 1,200 people with the help of Fox Navigation from New York City out here back to the island. We are now working at the request of Commissioner Carrick to try and bring emergency personnel, doctors, nurses, back into Manhattan to try and help relieve some of these doctors and nurses that are going to start getting very exhausted at the area hospitals down on the southern tip of Manhattan.
And is there a number people should call or a location they ought to go to if they are medical personnel and can help in the effort down there, where they can get on one of these ferries and come on down?
We'd like them to come to the end of Glen Cove Road, the northern end of Glen Cove Road in Glen Cove, to the parking lot across from our police station, the end of Glen Cove Road, across from the Glen Cove Police Station, where we will take them by bus down to the ferry terminal. If they want to call for information, they should call the ferry terminal itself at 609-3342, 609-3342. We're coordinating with the Nassau County and Suffolk County emergency management offices as well, but right now we need to get emergency-type personnel, doctors, nurses, EMTs. We know everybody wants to help, but we're not looking for just regular volunteers who mean well, and we appreciate their interest. We're looking for professionals who can go into Manhattan and be prepared to work.
Tom, thank you for joining us and for your efforts today. I apologize for mispronouncing your name a moment ago. Thank you. Judy in Washington.
Aaron, we're here in the Washington studio, and among others, I'm joined by former U.S. Secretary of State Alexander Haig, former Army General Haig. You were, of course, Secretary of State during the Ronald Reagan administration. And Mr. Secretary, you were in that post at a time of a national emergency, the assassination attempt on the life of President Reagan. And what I want to specifically ask you about is, what is it like for the people on the inside, the heartbeat of government, when something horrific like this happens? Of course, this is a very different situation, but what is it like when you have to react to something?
Well, I think most people wait and look for direction. And so it's very important that they have it. If they don't, they sometimes sit in shocked inaction. And so you have to have that. And that's the critical aspect of moving through a crisis of this kind.
And we've heard
attendance this moment, but as it has been about 8 hours now, let us try to bring you up to date with the horrendous sights and sounds of this attack on the United States and its citizens today. Here's ABC's John Donvan.
We want to tell you what we know as we know it, but we just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at
the first thing any television camera saw this morning was this. Just before 9 o'clock, roughly 15 minutes earlier, an American Airlines jet hijacked from Boston had crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. There were 92 people on board.
It does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
My God.
That looks like a second plane.
I did not see a plane go in.
Minutes later, the second plane, the second tower. The fireball ate up the aircraft. It was a United Airlines flight, a 767 from Boston to Los Angeles. There had been 65 people on board.
Some sort of a concerted.
I was happened to look on the first tower, and I actually saw people waving where the first plane crashed through, and then it was unbelievable seeing this second jet come crashing into the second tower. What is going on?
New York City was staggered.
As soon as he got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs, burnt up. It's bad.
And still it wasn't over. This was the southern tower falling in on itself. It was now roughly an hour since the first attack. Meanwhile, it was beginning here in Washington. Another hijacked plane hits the Pentagon.
U.S. officials are saying there was no warning, no indicators of any kind of a likely terrorist attack. Number two, they say Pentagon officials within the intelligence and the counterterrorism offices are now looking at this very intensely.
ABC reporters across the city are beginning to hear the word terrorism.
It seems
seems obvious unofficially to people here that it was a terrorist attack, but they obviously can't reach any firm conclusions at this point. So the Pentagon is engaged, and I'm sure law enforcement is, but they say they had no warnings.
Report piles on report.
Okay, there's been an explosion of some kind that shook the grounds of the Capitol. We all heard it. Everybody ran for cover. We don't know where it was. We don't see the smoke yet. Everybody's saying, get back. We're running, we're running, we're running, we're running. They're screaming at us to get back.
On television, it looked like it was happening all over. 10:28 a.m., New York City, and in the shadow of the one remaining tower, a snatch of conversation between a reporter and a rescuer.
Why are they pulling us out of here?
Because the tower is leaning.
The north tower is leaning. Right, Marty, quick. Oh my God, there it goes!
I looked up as soon as we got across the street. I looked up, I saw the tower start to buckle. I just turned and ran, ducked down, put a jacket over my head. 3 or 4 of us huddled together, and it was just black everywhere.
Washington, the White House is evacuated.
The Office of Personnel Management says all federal office buildings in the Washington area have been evacuated and closed. The employees sent home immediately.
The evacuation order creates instant gridlock in downtown Washington. The president was not in the city. He was in Florida visiting a school.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
Officials at this end are not confirming that the president's plane is going to Andrews. We don't know if it's going to Andrews or some other location. All they've said is that he will convene a National Security Council meeting, and we don't know where that will take place either. Obviously, they want to keep a lot of people guessing as to the president's whereabouts.
Now it was lunchtime, and yet more terrible news is coming in. Another United airliner with 45 people on board has crashed south of Pittsburgh, presumably another victim of terrorism.
We talked to a couple of people who actually witnessed the plane going down and said it was quite devastating. Went right down into the woods. They saw all sorts of debris flying out into the woods and into the trees, and it's quite a devastating scene from what we're told.
At this point, it is hard to believe we're still in the same day that began with this picture. National Guard units are out. Washington is shut down. Airports in the U.S. and Canada are closed. And the death toll, still uncountable, is also unimaginable. John Donvan, ABC News, Washington.
Excellent report from John Donvan, pulling together this day, which has so much immediacy, so much history, such magnitude to it, and touches every American. And as I turn around on occasion to look at the computer screen behind me, I find emails coming in from people in other countries, Canada and Europe included, from friends and from families and colleagues, all expressing this deep empathy and sympathy for people here today who had friends and acquaintances, but just seeming at whatever distance to appreciate what is happening, even though they were not close to it. We're now joined by a young man who was very close to it again. This is Evan Fairbanks. He's a freelance photographer. Interestingly enough, you and I were just talking about journalists' emotions at a time like this, and the last thing journalists can afford to do is to fall prey to their emotions at a time like this, because it's too hard in the middle of a story. But you were very close this morning and photographing on assignment for a church when things began to happen. So we're going to show your videotape, if we may, though. Are you principally a still photographer? Or both?
Still and video.
Okay. Can we just look at what your first video is and explain it to us?
I walked out of Trinity Church after we had a blackout in our studio, and one of the studio managers grabbed one of our cameras when we knew what was happening. And I went out and was shooting aftermath.
Good God.
And I suddenly saw a plane flying into my viewfinder and said, gee, it's kind of close for that to be here now, and then realized what happened.
Yeah.
And
we'll run this again, because I think this is, when we run that again, Roger Goodman, that's Roger Goodman, our director, because this is We've seen footage before of people on the run, and I understand that that's your shadow as you went by a storefront.
Yeah, actually,
right?
it was. It's the first time I've seen that.
And was there absolute panic immediately?
Instantly. It was just pandemonium. Nobody knew what to do. There was no clear thinking. People were just reacting to kind of save themselves and the
this
people
is
around
subsequently,
them.
you're in the same location when the building comes down.
I had been taken downstairs by Port Authority police who knew that I had this videotape. And we were moving actually to go back to the Trinity Church to make them a dub of the tape in a format that they could use on a VHS tape. And suddenly I heard one of the guys say, "Hey, Evan, watch out."
Hang on just a second. If you look in the upper, this now is frozen. And this is an angle of this attack that we have not seen before. At the top of the building on your left, out of the left, will come the building. And watch how the aircraft penetrates the building. Go ahead. Completely in one side and out the other.
It just disappeared. It disappeared like a bad special effect. It disappeared right into the building. I've seen it 6, 7 times now. It's still incomprehensible what is actually happening there. You're right. As a journalist, you have to take yourself away from it, and I'm still not there yet. And the more and more I see it, and as time goes by.
The modern technology enables us to see horror just as we are able to see sport in a variety of different speeds or at a variety of different speeds. And I think you now have a better appreciation than we have had up until now, for which we thank you, Evan, because we see exactly how determined somebody was to do this horrible damage, taking a plane so powerfully and so fast in one side of the building. Tell me more what it's been like for you today as working the street.
It's numbing. It's like being in the 4th dimension. It's like it's not even New York City where it's happening. Nothing is normal. People are just walking in a daze up and down the streets. Nobody knows where to go. I just feel kind of this nervous, anxious buzz, and still unfathomable.
Trinity Church, one of the oldest, I think the oldest Episcopal church, certainly in this part of the world, certainly the oldest in the city, on the edge of Wall Street there. Was it being used? Did people come to it for any subsequent occasion?
We were only shooting a kind of a teleconference up in the 4th floor TV studio there. And we were all sitting in the studio about an hour before our airtime, and there was the lights went out for a second, they flickered. And we kind of joked with the studio guys that they had just put in a new studio and said, "Hey, you guys better watch out for that. That's not normal." And then within 10 seconds, people came running in and said that the Trade Center had been hit. They tried to call a production meeting and ask people to stay in the building, and people were just kind of fleeing. And I grabbed my still camera and was going to run out, not really heeding what anybody was saying there, knowing what was happening outside and feeling the need to be there. And one of the guys came out of the studio with a camera and was putting a tape in it, and I just grabbed it and ran.
And we saw the shadow of you running across the street. What was you afraid of, principally, as you were running?
I was afraid that I was going to be rained upon by whatever was coming off the building. So I knew that I had a few seconds to get basically an establishing shot, and then I had to look out for myself. And I ran. I was on the southeast corner of the plaza. I'm not sure exactly what building is there. And I just went around the corner a little south on Church and just got underneath a car and pointed the camera up into the sky and stayed there for a while, and then came out after a few minutes when the debris stopped raining so heavily. And I went around the corner and was pulled under an overhang by a couple of Port Authority police, to whom I immediately mentioned what I had shot. And they just grabbed me and whisked me down into the Port Authority police headquarters. And we were leaving there to go back to Trinity Church to make a dub of the tape, when suddenly the tower to the top collapsed. And I just looked up and saw from basically 2 blocks away this reverse mushroom cloud coming down at me.
I know I said earlier this looked like a banana suddenly being peeled. It's extraordinary.
I've seen shots of the collapse from far away, and I just can't believe that I was actually there and walked away. I mean, I had to dive underneath. I ran backwards with the camera just pointed behind me, away from the scene, and saw that, you know, have heard about clouds enveloping people and oxygen being depleted, and I just dove under the biggest emergency response vehicle that I could see, stayed there for about 30 seconds, saw nothing but pitch black. I started having difficulty breathing. I thought my oxygen was starting to dwindle, and there was a moment when I said, well, this might be it. And my only chance is to get out and start walking north.
Well, we're very grateful to you. Very grateful you're okay, and that you took these photographs and that you shared them with the public. They're very dramatic. I needn't tell you that, but I'm very grateful to you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Nice to see you. Evan Fairbank. He's a freelance photographer who was working in Trinity Church today on the edge of Wall Street today when he and his colleagues on a production shoot in a church saw these two extraordinary scenes from, to put it directly, from a different angle, because we have seen it so many times, but this is the most dramatic angle we have seen this plane flying at the top of that building. It's quite extraordinary. I want to go to Washington very briefly because we said the president was on his way, we believe, to Washington from Nebraska, and ABC's Claire Shipman is there, and I gather, Claire, the president wants to talk to the nation again.
Indeed, he does. He is on his way back to Washington at this point. We're told he does plan to address the nation tonight, but we don't have a time for that. We're told that he feels very strongly about this. People said the FBI is the main person.
Yeah. Clear if the plane was.
And he's mine, and I'm not going to let some crazy person take.
And Aaron, this may be another point where we want to say, God bless the souls of those who have lost their lives today or who are dying.
How much direct proof we have of the involvement of the countries. If we have direct
been running, and that's what's most important to us, so try to minimize the risks. So it looks like a lot of people will be back. A couple of little notes about the president's return. We're told it's likely he will land, as he usually does, at Andrews Air Force Base. They think the airspace here is probably United States. We've known the president's been flying around the country. The vice president's been out of sight. The Secretary of Defense, Mr. Rumsfeld, has also been out of sight. What can you tell us about him, and what else is going on there?
A short time ago, he did come out and inspect the damage here at the Pentagon, along with the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Richard Myers. We're so far away, though, we could barely see that it was them. It had to be pointed out to me by a Pentagon official who they were. The Secretary of Defense, although initially ran to the scene, apparently, of the tragedy and actually assisted getting some people onto stretchers, was then brought back to the National Military Command Center in the bowels of the Pentagon, a secure war room area where he has been receiving intelligence briefings and informational updates. The Pentagon says that it can account for all of the senior military leadership. None of them were killed in this attack. However, there have been some
Jamie McIntyre, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're going to go to Israel. The Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon.
Terror attacks, the worst that had ever been seen. We express our deep regret and send our condolences, wholehearted condolences. We are ready to extend whatever aid and assistance is required. War against terror is an international war, a war of a coalition of the free world against all the terror groups and against whoever believes that can pose a threat to freedom. This is a war between the good and the bad, between humanity and those who are bloodthirsty. The criminal attack today on innocent civilians in the United States is a turning point in war against international terror. Even if the war against terror is long, and even if the terror will try to raise its head again, there won't be any room in the world in which terrorists, their assistants, and those who send them to be able to find a shelter or a refuge. the government of Israel has decided tomorrow a mourning day in a show of solidarity with the American people. I would like to send my condolences to the American people, to President George Bush, and to all the citizens of the United States. In this very difficult hour, our hearts are with you. Could you tell the Israeli public what are the impacts of these attacks on the people here? I have already said very clearly that there will only be a statement. There won't be any other statement apart from what I have already said. We have to wait and see what happened. Our stand vis-à-vis terror is very well known, very firm and decisive, and we will act accordingly.
On behalf of the people of Israel,
בעת הזאת עליהם להפסיק באופן מיידי את הטרור במצב הנוכחי ושיטב להם אם יעשו זאת מבחינתם באופן חד צדדי לרשות הפלסטינית. זה המסר ששמעון פרס העביר. עד כאן יעקב.
Against our common values. The fight against terror is an international struggle of the free world against the forces of darkness who seek to destroy our liberty and our way of life. I believe that together we can defeat these forces of evil. At this most difficult hour, all Israelis stand as one with the American people. Our hearts are with you, and we are ready to provide any assistance at any time. The government of Israel has declared a day of mourning tomorrow as we bow our heads and share in the sorrow of the American people. טוב, תודה רבה לכם.
Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon talking briefly with reporters, offering first of all his condolences to Americans, saying whoever believes or saying rather this has been a threat to freedom. He went on to say this is a criminal attack on innocent civilians, and he called it a turning point in the war against international terrorism. He went on to say, he said, even if this war is long, there will be no room for terrorists to find refuge. He also said that tomorrow in Israel will be a day of mourning. Now we want to go back to the Pentagon, to CNN's military affairs correspondent, Jamie McIntyre. You want to pick up where you left off, Jamie, describing the situation there and also what Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld is up to.
Well, Judy, the fires are still burning here in some parts of the Pentagon, as you can see from some of the smoke that's coming up from behind me. There will be a recovery effort that will get underway fairly soon. A lot of heavy equipment has brought in so-called urban rescue units that are usually used in the event of an earthquake, have been brought in from some of the local fire departments in Fairfax and Montgomery County in order to assist in trying to find the bodies of people here. They have not given any casualty figures, but we know that people died in this incident, including, not the least of which is the more than 60 passengers who were on that American Airlines Flight 77 that took off from Dulles Airport this morning. One of the eyewitnesses to this incident was a TV reporter himself who was in traffic and actually saw the plane come in. I talked to him earlier today. His name is Mike Walter of USA Today Live.
I was heading in northbound on 27, and the traffic this morning, it was, a typical rush hour, had ground to a standstill, and I looked off, looked out my window, I saw this plane, a jet, American Airlines jet coming, and I thought, this doesn't add up, it's really low, and I saw it just went, it was like a cruise missile with wings, went right there and slammed right into the Pentagon. Huge explosion, great ball of fire, and smoke started billowing out, and then it was just chaos on the highway as people either tried to move around the traffic and go down either forward or backwards. We had a lady who was in front of me who was backing up and screaming, "Everybody go back, they've hit the Pentagon." And, it's just sheer terror.
What goes through your mind when you see something like that?
I've asked that question of a million people, and the only thing that I just kept uttering it over and over again. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I can't believe this. And I think that's what goes through your mind, is that you just can't believe that something like this could happen. And yet I was sitting there listening on the radio to the accounts of what had happened in New York. I just listened to the president. And you'd think, as a journalist, I put two and two together and think, oh my God, but it didn't even occur to me.
And obviously this was an enormous tragedy, but did you witness any of the rescue or any of the victims?
I got to tell you, I got out and walked over, and I saw parts of the plane. The debris was actually on the overpass there, and I watched as this military personnel just came running out with stretchers and tarps and set up a triage unit. And I just couldn't help but feel for these guys. Those are their friends and comrades in there, and yet they immediately jumped into action. It was unbelievable to watch. And the toughest thing for me right now is I've got a 14-year-old daughter, and a lot of her friends have parents who work in the Pentagon. And I just talked to her on the phone, and those kids are going through agony tonight. They don't know if they're okay. So it's tough. This really hits home.
And Judy, there's still a lot of work to be done here. This part of the Pentagon had undergone a major renovation. Some of the people here told me stories about heroic efforts. Others described how some of the new architecture of the renovated Pentagon may have helped save their lives. One Navy officer told me about how he saw the flames rush by his window, which shook, but because they're made of new tempered glass that had been put in to increase security, they did not break. The work will continue throughout the night. Pentagon officials say they do hope to reoccupy the other part of the building that's not affected. It's a huge building. 24,000 people work here, but it may be a number of days before anybody's able to go back to work. Judy?
All right, Jamie McIntyre reporting from the Pentagon. And Jamie, your interview reminding us that first and foremost, this is a horrific human tragedy. Families with hearts broken in New York, in Washington, and all across this nation. Just a quick word on what we've been learning. We do expect tonight President George Bush will speak to the nation in a televised address. We don't have much more information than that in terms of when. In addition, we are told that the 4 leaders of Congress, the House Speaker Dennis Hastert, the House Democratic leader Richard Gephardt, and over in the Senate side, Tom Daschle, the Democratic leader, and Trent Lott, the Republican leader, all 4 of them will come together at, I'm told, 7:30 on the east front of the Capitol for a news statement, perhaps a news conference. We all know that at times of crisis, the very visceral fights that go on between the political parties in our country fall away. It may only be for a brief period, but this is one of those times when political partisan differences are being put aside to come together to speak to the country. Joining me here in the Washington studio, a familiar name, a familiar face, best-selling author of so many novels, Tom Clancy, mysteries at the heart, Tom Clancy, of the military community, the intelligence community. People in our newsroom have been saying today what's happening is like right out of a Tom Clancy novel, but could you possibly imagine something like this to write about?
No, one of the problems with being a writer of fiction is that you can't keep up with all the madmen in the world as much as you try. And I frankly would have thought that this was not a credible threat to have 4 separate people decide to commit suicide in the same way on the same morning.
Why not?
Because ending your own life is not something the average person does. Everybody's assuming these are Islamic terrorists. Well, if so, they've defiled their own religion. You know, Islam does not permit suicide. It says you go to hell if you do something like this.
But we see suicide bombings in the Middle East and in Israel. And
Judy, we saw people in Northern Ireland, Catholics acting like savages and Protestants acting like savages. So anyhow, we have people who call themselves Muslims acting like savages. It happens. It's not because of their religion, it's because they're fools.
what does this say now? I mean, you've done a lot of reporting. I mean, you not only write fiction, you do a lot of reporting from inside the intelligence community, inside the military community. What does this say about how prepared we are as a country?
Well, people always ask a kind of a question when things go wrong, but you don't ask the question when things go right, and the reason is you can't tell when things go right in that business. Well, one of the things I've been saying for a lot of years is that we need to upgrade the human capability, human intelligence capabilities in CIA and the rest of our intelligence community, because you can do a lot with satellites, you can do a lot with eavesdropping techniques, but you can't find out what's in a person's mind except by talking to that person. And so the agency needs to increase its human intelligence capability. The CIA has about 20,000 employees, less than 1,000 of whom are actually field intelligence officers. That number should be at least doubled. But yeah, America as a nation doesn't love our intelligence community. And certainly the news media does not love our intelligence community.
I'm going to interrupt you, Tom Clancy. I'm told Aaron Brown in New York has a development. Aaron?
Well, Judy, just in the last few seconds, another building, we will speculate carefully here that there was building number 7, one of the buildings in support of the World Trade Center towers has collapsed. Those of you who have been with us for a while, you can see indeed that the smoke color has changed has gotten much lighter. So we believe that yet another building, this would be the 3rd building, has collapsed, likely building number 7, although we also heard that there were problems at building number 5, and it's possible that one went down too. But again, another building in the Trade Center complex appears now to have caved in after these attacks. Judy?
Aaron, we're looking at these pictures, Tom Clancy and I, as we sit here in the Washington studio, and just as I come back to Tom Clancy, I want to read just a portion of a statement issued by Secretary of State Powell, Colin Powell, calling these attacks a terrible tragedy befallen not just my nation, but all the nations of this region, all the nations of the world, all those who believe in democracy. Tom Clancy, you were saying, sure, we can ask these questions about failed security, failed intelligence when things go wrong, but we have every right to ask these questions, don't we?
Well, no, the First Amendment, you have a right to say anything you want, but it's a practical matter. One of the things we have to do, if you want to prevent things like this from happening, is you build up your defenses. And your first line of defense against terrorism is an intelligence gathering capability. Now, when was the last time CNN or the news media in general said, gee, we ought to put more money into the human intelligence capabilities of the CIA? Answer, you never do it. Never.
Well, we wouldn't take a side on something like that. Anyway, in terms of what do you fund and...
Yeah, we always take a side on saying they failed. Why not help them succeed once in a while?
Are you saying that they are significantly underfunded in that area? And not just the CIA, but the FBI?
Human intelligence is de-emphasized. The FBI's job is...
Spying is what we're talking about
Yeah,
here.
that's what intelligence officers do, is they spy. And the CIA has 20,000 employees, about 800 of whom are actually spooks. And of them, maybe as many as 2/3 actually get outside and do spook operations.
And we know that...
And we need to do better than that. We need to do more than that. You gather information of this type by putting people out on the street, the same way cops gather information from informants. This isn't rocket science. It's just a matter of hiring the people and letting them do the work.
But I'm going to turn it back over to Aaron, but my question is, how do you know what to believe? We had an Arab journalist in London just today saying, we had this information a few weeks ago, it was coming, we didn't know whether to believe it. Now back to Aaron in New York.
Thank you. We've talked a number of times today about the fact that it is simply too dangerous for officials to get in and around these buildings. It's so very, very dangerous, and the proof of that, just a few moments ago when another building in the complex that is the World Trade Center, or was the World Trade Center, collapsed. Maureen, we can show you what that looked like. These are taped pictures taken literally just a few moments ago. When that building went down, we are seeing them for the first time. This is, correct me in the booth, but I believe that was, in fact, a piece of tape that we got just a bit ago of the second plane hitting the South Tower of the Trade Center. just a little bit after 9 o'clock this morning. Again, a third building at the Trade Center has collapsed within the last 3 or 4 minutes. Building number 7, this is no small building, as you can see, at 47 stories. It would stand out in most American cities. It looks small, I guess, when you look at what was the 100-plus stories of the World Trade Center, but building number 7, it's 40-plus stories, almost 50 stories, collapsing as well. And if we can go back to the tape and see it one more time, and I'll look at it with you. Again, this occurred just in the last several moments around the Trade Center building. Building number 7, 47 stories. Maureen Madden, CNN producer, is in the area. Maureen, what can you tell us? What did you see?
Well, about 2 minutes ago, we happened to see 7 World Trade Center go down, which holds the Office of Emergency Management for the City of New York on the 23rd floor there. When we heard from the fire department of NYPD, is that the whole south part of the building was engulfed in flames at one point, and it was a matter of time to collapse. They're just waiting for it to collapse, which we've been waiting for about a half hour. When it went down, it was quick, it was quiet, and we saw a lot of smoke come up. And now the smoke has pretty much gone off to the side, going towards the east side of Manhattan.
So unlike the collapse of the first of the towers way back this morning, around 10 or so this morning, and then the second tower, which collapsed shortly thereafter, at least where building number 7 is concerned, a building that, among other things, housed the emergency response team of the City of New York, at least they had some warning. They had signs that this might happen, and they were able to get as many people away from the area. And the people in the area, of course, are firefighters, EMS personnel, and literally thousands of police officers who have cordoned off the area.
Correct. About 5 minutes ago.
For those of you who have been with us throughout the day, we have shown you a number of times a piece of video, pictures of a plane coming into the building. We have now another piece of video that will show the same thing, different angle. And if we can roll that and take a look now, this again was shortly after the first. Wow, oh my gosh. I wonder, this comes to us from PAX TV. I wonder, guys, if we can re-cue that in a moment and show that again. You see the fire coming out of the first building there, the plane on the lower left side of your screen. And it looks to me, and I'll confess I don't have the greatest monitor here, that you could almost see the nose of that plane coming through the other side of the building. That may have been an illusion as we looked at it here, but that's how it looked to us. As the flames, these are fully loaded planes, fully loaded with jet fuel. They were headed from the East Coast to the West Coast, so they had an enormous amount of jet fuel. Jeffrey Beatty, a security consultant, said to us a little bit ago, this was low-tech, high-concept. The plane was the bomb, and you just saw the bomb go off. That was around 10 o'clock this morning. That was around 9 o'clock this morning, about 9:08 this morning. Ben Wiedemann, who normally reports for us, I'm sorry, we'll get to that. Let's go back to Washington and CNN's Judy Woodruff. Judy?
Aaron, again, pictures that have everyone here riveted. We're told, I don't know whether we have this picture right now available to show our viewers, but I'm told that just a short time ago, driving up Massachusetts Avenue, which is one of the main thoroughfares here in the nation's capital, goes all the way from the Capitol out to northwest Washington, beyond the Naval Observatory where the Vice President lives, and beyond on out into the Maryland suburbs. There was observed a convoy of military vehicles, Humvees, military vehicles, driving up slowly, patrolling, appearing to patrol the area, going out away from the Capitol toward northwest, toward Maryland. Now, perhaps this is just a patrolling effort, but the sight of it has to be something to cause comment, because normally at this hour in Washington you would see an enormous amount of just rush hour traffic, but today is not like any other day. Now to our own senior White House correspondent John King, who's just about a block and a half from the White House on top of an office building up above the 10th floor there. John?
Judy, a few quick bits of information. As we have been reporting, the president is on his way back to Washington, and we can now say definitively that when he arrives in Washington, he will address the American people tonight. I am told by sources plans are for an address from the White House. The target time, 9 p.m. That could be moved up a little, but 8 or 9 p.m. we are now told is the target time. But for now, the administration will not confirm that the address will be broadcast from the White House. There have been security concerns throughout the day. We see now on the grounds of the White House, which was evacuated hours ago, some bomb-sniffing dogs and other security personnel securing the area around the White House. But we are told by administration officials the president will be back in Washington shortly and will address the American people tonight. And as we reported a bit earlier, congressional leaders who also, as part of the protocol, the emergency evacuation protocol, were taken to secure locations themselves outside of Washington. The bipartisan congressional leadership also making its way back to Washington, and it will deliver statements, the 4 leaders from the steps of the Capitol tonight as well. All of these designed to offer signs of reassurances to the American people that their government is up and running at this time of great tragedy. I want to add one other bit of information. A lot of lawmakers trying to get briefings from Capitol Hill police, from administration officials, from the CIA and the FBI and others. We are told that in those briefings there has been some speculation, and again the law enforcement officials saying this is just speculation at this moment, that that plane that crashed outside of Pittsburgh may have been heading toward Washington. In those briefings, I'm told by several sources, 3 potential targets were listed. 1, the presidential retreat at Camp David, 2, the White House, and 3, the United States Capitol building. Again, though, lawmakers and other officials being given those briefings told that is speculative, but based on the flight paths and everything else we've seen unfold on this tragic day, that law enforcement officials believe at this moment that the potential targets for that plane, which crashed outside Pittsburgh, were perhaps Camp David, perhaps the White House behind me, or perhaps the United States Capitol. Judy?
John, and we can only imagine the struggle that must have gone on board that aircraft in the cockpit or wherever in order to keep the plane from going where the people who wanted to bring it to Washington, they were obviously prevented from reaching their target. Air travel throughout the United States, domestic air travel, has been shut down today since these terrible incidents in New York City and here in Washington. In fact, there's no air travel until at least noon tomorrow on order of the Federal Aviation Administration. But right now we want to go to one of the airports in the Washington area, that is Dulles International. This is the site of where the American Airlines flight 77 that left this morning on its way to Los Angeles and ended up plowing into the Pentagon a very short time later. CNN's Eileen O'Connor is there at Dulles. Eileen?
Well, there has been some activity here, Judy. The FBI has arrived, and they have been seen going in and out of the building. They brought some equipment in to check through the building. We do know from airport personnel and the airport authority that both National and Dulles are shut down till 11 o'clock at least tomorrow morning, but also that they immediately implemented an emergency drill procedure. And that means that they called in all of their police, and they have their own police force and their own fire personnel, and they also have all of their operational staff here at the airport. They are securing the airport. You can see actually behind me, they have actually erected barricades, concrete barricades, with some of these forklifts. Have been operating over the last hour, erecting these barricades. Also, there's barricades right now in the entrances to the airport to prevent anyone from coming back here. As you also said, United and American Airlines, obviously they are the ones that lost flights. They have been issuing statements saying that they are trying to help the families, both of these airlines issuing statements. They've also said that they have accounted for all of their other flights and that they are all safely on the ground. They want to make sure people know that. And they also say that they will do everything they can to make sure that their customers, the people who were traveling, are comfortable until they can fly on to their destinations. Judy?
And Eileen, any other people around there? I mean, we see you, obviously, and we see a few other people, but presumably not much other activity there at all.
No, and they have actually tried to stage some of the, obviously there are relatives, concerned relatives from the American flight that took off from this morning, and we are being told by airport authorities that they are trying to send those relatives over to a nearby hotel and to try to give them information. Both airlines have issued phone numbers for for people to find out about loved ones. One of those airlines is United. Their number is 800-932-8555. But they are saying that people should stay away from the airports. These airports are shut. Again, they're under emergency procedures. And also, you know, Judy, for here, an investigation is taking place. The FBI is already here. They've had sniffer dogs around the airport. They want to see how the security was breached. We are also told that the tarmac has been secure, that the airplanes that are currently on the ground were very quickly secured after it was decided to shut these airports down. Judy?
Eileen, just reiterating, there were 8 cities in the United States involved with these aircraft that plowed into the Trade Center building complex, into the Pentagon, and then into the ground in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, south of Pittsburgh. 2 planes took off from Boston, 1 from Newark, 1 from Dulles near Washington, where you are. 3 of those flights were headed for Los Angeles, 1 for San Francisco. Of course, none of those flights reached their intended destination. Now back to Aaron in New York.
Judy, thank you. It is, I know for many of you around the country, you are making your way home. You have not necessarily been with us all day long. Life has gone on, I suppose, with TVs on in most offices, but life has gone on. I just wonder if we can take a shot of the building behind me, the World Trade Center building, and just take a moment to try and absorb, not with the facts, not with the pieces of information, but just look at that scene and think about what happened today. There were 50,000 or so people who came to work on a beautiful late summer morning here in New York, in those 2 towers that are now gone. These are people with families, with children, people who had offices and have them no more, people whose lives are forever changed. And it happened in a space of very few minutes. 8:48 this morning it began. A few minutes later, at about 9:08, a second plane zoomed towards the unhit tower, the second tower. You see it in the lower part of your screen. And it just slices that tower in half. If we can re-rack it and show it again so you'll know where to look, you'll see the plane first in the lower left side of the screen coming at it, and there it goes. And what must it have been like in those buildings and on these hijacked airliners? We heard earlier that Barbara Olson, a frequent commentator here, was on the flight that was going to Washington, or had been hijacked to Washington. She called her husband and said that the hijacking was underway. She said that from what she could tell, the hijackers, and she didn't indicate how many, except there was more than one, were armed with just knives and cardboard cutters, that they had herded all the people on board this flight to the back of the plane, including the pilot. And she asked her husband, the Solicitor General, Ted Olson, who many of you will recall argued the post-election case before the Supreme Court, said to her husband, "What do I do?" And shortly after that, that plane with Ms. Olson and many more crashed at the Pentagon. General Wesley Clark joins us from Little Rock. General Clark has been with us a number of times today. General, I wonder if you will weigh in for a second on this debate or this discussion that has been going on for most of the afternoon here, which is, have we misapplied in some ways, intelligence resources, that we have become so infatuated with what we can do with machines and high tech that we have inappropriately, I guess, spent less money, less time, less effort on the down and dirty human intelligence.
Well, that's certainly a question that everyone is going to be asking, and it will be asked in official channels, and it will be asked to those who are best in a position to give that answer. My experience with it has been that I've heard this charge now for some 25 years in the intelligence business, and we have put emphasis into not only technical intelligence but human intelligence. But you know, it's very hard to get the kind of specific intelligence that would prevent something like this. Many of these people are members of a family. They come from a specific village, perhaps. Their background is known and vetted. They're carefully controlled. Their movements and communications are monitored. And it's difficult, no doubt, for any intelligence organization, no matter how well it's resourced and how courageous its members, to penetrate an organization like that and give us information. Intelligence is always characterized by a failure to know what you don't know. And I'm sure that we'll make improvements. There are always more things that can be done in the aftermath of something like this. But if there's one single message that comes through to me here, and I think will come through to many others, it's that it's not enough simply to put up the best defenses against terrorism, but that more active measures are no doubt called for, particularly in this case.
When you say more active measures, you're talking about proactive?
That's right. Preemptive measures. We've known a number of these groups have for a long time said they declared war on the United States. And we have dealt with them, we've fenced with them, we've cooperated with other governments against them, we've chased individuals, we've hauled some into court. But I think that not only do we have to ask ourselves, could we have learned more in this specific case, we have to also ask ourselves, could we have done more if we've been willing to take greater risks, if we've been willing to take more extraordinary measures earlier, to take some of these groups and these individuals at their word that they had declared war on us and they deserved to be taken seriously and they merited some preemptive action.
And just perhaps stating the obvious, sir, when you talk about preemptive action, first of all, you got to be able to find the people you're taking the action against. Do we know where the right people are so that if the country is going after these people, they get the right people?
Well, I think that's always the problem. And there will always be a certain degree of uncertainty, and there'll be a certain degree of concern about this. The best way to handle any international terrorist organization is to arrest its leaders, present the evidence, and have them tried in a court of law. And that certainly is the way anyone would prefer to deal with this. But perhaps in some cases it's not possible to do that, or it's not possible to do that quick enough. We'll have to ask those questions in the aftermath. It's not simply about intelligence, it's also about acting on intelligence.
I mean, ultimately, sir, this is not simply a military or an intelligence question. This is a core political question. It really has to do with how we see ourselves in a country, whether we are willing to take the risks that some innocents may perish because of what we as a country do, and that's a political question for the country to deal with.
It's a profound political question, and I think it's also a question for the international community, because an event like this is a real cry for alarm and recognition in the international community. A tragedy like this can happen here, it can happen anywhere. And international terrorism is too dangerous and too ambiguous and too difficult for any single nation to handle by itself. We need strong, reliable support from friends and allies around the world, and I'm sure we'll be asking for it. And clearly one of the things that ought to come from this is not only better U.S. intelligence, it's better sharing of information, pooling of information with our partners in all corners of the globe.
General Clark, thanks again for joining us as you have a number of other times today, and I suspect you will again before the day is out. General Wesley Clark in Little Rock, Arkansas today. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Judy?
you.
Aaron, we want to tell our viewers, first of all, that we have just been handed a report from CNN reporter Patty Davis that all international flights have now arrived or will be arriving shortly. Those are flights coming into the United States or Canada. Those are flights that presumably had left their destination hours and hours ago, but they have arrived safely, or they are expected to shortly. We'll continue to bring you updates on air travel as we get them. And I've just been told that President Bush will address the nation tonight at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Now, we had been told a little bit earlier the President would be speaking to the American people. We now have confirmed the time is 9 o'clock Eastern, and you can count on the fact, of course, CNN will